I'm going to actually go down here, and so I can point at stuff on the screen as we go through. A lot of the ideas, as you might guess, oops, sorry, went too far, are based on this book. That is, the core principles that are in the book are at the core of what I want to talk about this evening. But it's actually an extension of those ideas. I'm going to start by some of the problems that we have, or challenges, you might say, and then move into what we can do about them. The first category of problem I want to talk about is the problem of specialists. My son is a chef, and so he can immediately tell you what the difference is between all these whisks, whereas I have no clue. You know, and the problem with specialties, and we've all now gotten to the point at this point in history where we all specialize in something, and then we trade the money we make from our specialty for things that other specialists make. But the problem with that is that because they're the experts and you're not, then you have no authority to tell them that isn't good enough or that isn't broad enough or whatever. And so we end up focusing on narrower and narrower parts of whatever it is that we do. And we may get really good at those narrow things, but then we just simply forget about other things. That's just the nature of specialties. And so you might get a situation like this where the transportation specialist recommends bringing the freeway into the city. And that's really good for making cars drive fast and get to town fast, but it's horrible for the people that have to live on either side. Matter of fact, we'll look at this in more detail here in just a minute. I'm going to go through a number of things that are challenges we have with cities. First of all, the engineering department. They're now requiring in many cities, I don't know about here, but I kind of suspect it might be the case, that everyone handles all their own stormwater on site. Well, not only are these things hideously ugly, this is actually just down the road in Niceville, by the way, but they also have another effect that you can't see quite so clearly, and that is if you want to build a place this urban, but you have to every site has to take care of its own stormwater, then that becomes a very difficult thing to do. If you want to build an even bigger city like this, or one of the great cities, then it just becomes utterly impossible. I mean, you'd have to bulldoze half of Paris to take care of the stormwater on site on each of the sites, and so that just simply doesn't work. So it kind of goes back to the old idea of if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail, you know, and so that's where we are. Now there's some really fascinating work being done by people all around. Matter of fact, the Light Imprint initiative is something that Tom Lowe has done in Charlotte, and basically by handling stormwater in some very creative and beautiful ways over the scope of an entire neighborhood. He very often saves several $1 million in infrastructure, you know, by not doing the stormwater retention, but doing other things as well. And there's other groups that are looking at specifically strong towns and placemakers that are looking at a number of these infrastructure issues as well. Now I'm going to step outside of government for a moment into a particular advocacy. There's a group that says that every address in America should be visitable by people in wheelchairs. And you say, well, what's wrong with that? That's got to be a good thing, right? But what it amounts to is what you have to do is, in essence, you have to flatten large areas of the urbanism. And that means on one side, you're going to have a big cut. On the other side, on hilly terrain, you're going to have a big fill. And then it means that to get from any of these big flat areas to another big flat area, that you simply you have to drive. There's no possible way. I mean, nobody's going to climb that rock wall there. They just won't. And then if this were carried to its logical conclusion, then you know, places like San Francisco could just disappear into the mist one last time because we'd have to abandon it. Matter of fact, we'd have to vacate the entire state of West Virginia and other places as well. And so we really need, actually, the fascinating thing about what these guys do here, and I didn't put these slides in for them, I had them in already, but the fascinating thing about what they're doing here is actually the potential to create mobility beyond the wheelchair, which I really am very excited about where that might go in the next few years. If you look at the fire department, this is a place in Huntsville, Alabama. That's where I'm from originally. I live in South Beach now. Moved down there about 9 years ago. But this used to be a 5-lane highway before this T&D was built. This is a traditional neighborhood that was just built over the last decade or so. And when it was first designed, the city promised, hey, we'll give back the outer 2 lanes for parking. You can use those for parking instead of travel, and we'll let you do a median in the middle. Well, after 10 years, the median still isn't built because the fire department says, no, it's not good enough to now have 20 feet to put out our outriggers for the fire trucks. We now have to have 26 feet, and there's no possible way to get that in between here. And so what that means is, as well as the traffic travels faster, and on the chance that sometime in the next 40 years there might be a fire somewhere on that street that might take a few seconds longer for the fire truck to set up a few feet down, they're actually endangering every pedestrian for every moment of those 40 years between now and then. You know, I mean, it's just, but see, that's the problem. If that is your specialty, and that's all you're looking at, then nothing else really exists except for your specialty. And so, you know, a boulevard like this, you simply, you know, those would have to go away. I mean, you simply couldn't do anything like that in the future. And of course, the Department of Transportation, their only point is to say how many cars can we get from point A to point B as quickly as possible. They have what they call a level of service. Level of service A is like on the interstate, it's free flow. Level of service F is where the traffic is stopped. To get a great main street, you need about level of service D. Okay, so the cars are just moving, but they're moving very slowly because people will walk on those streets and they will get out, and you know it becomes a very vibrant place. But if the traffic's too fast, they don't. And so that's another example of why we need to take a broader view. Here's another set of challenges, and that is that for almost all of human history, or especially the Industrial Revolution period, there were a number of different reasons why cities occurred in certain places. And the economic drivers behind them were things like, you know, do you have natural resources? Or is there a lot of, you know, is there iron ore in the mountains or whatever? And then are you near a river or highways, you know, the intersection of 2 major highways, or are you right on the ocean? You know, here, for example, I kind of suspect that you guys were a port city before you were anything else. I actually don't know that for a fact, but you know, you got the port. But right now, you know, you need to ask, well, is that what's actually driving the economy of the place? Because now, the new economic driver you know, we've had the era of the company since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, but that's kind of ending now. It's not like companies are going away, but they're not the centerpiece of our economic lives like they have been. You know, you don't go to work for one place and stay there for 50 years or 40 years or whatever until you retire. You know, we're all kind of freelancers now to one degree or another. And so then the new time period that is now beginning, it's a major change. It's what I call the age of the idea. Okay, nobody wants to hear about your business anymore. You give them a business card, they might listen for 3 seconds. I have something that I call an idea card. I've got one for the original green, and I've got one for Project SmartDwelling. There's no bank account by those names. There's no corporate papers. It's simply an idea. And if you have a great idea, people will listen for hours. You know, but all those rules are changing. And so in the age of the idea, the thing that really is going to drive the economics of the place is going to be, what is your cool factor? You know, because nobody wants to go to work out at the office park anymore. You know, it's places like this that are a whole lot cooler than any office park ever was. Another idea, and that is that up until now, we've had enough money in most cities that we've been able to spend on whatever kind of projects that you want. Now the new standard is every single project that gets done from this point forward, you really need to be asking, what's the return on investment? You know, when does the city get enough back in tax revenue or whatever the revenue is that the thing is generating, that it actually is going to make the city money? The city has to be a good steward of revenues now. You can't just throw money away on stuff that may never pay itself back. Another challenge we've got is something I call automobile poverty. And basically, the idea here is that the average cost of owning and operating an automobile in the U.S., if you talk about the payments, the insurance, the gas, the repairs, all of this stuff, the parking if you have to pay for that, but the average across the U.S. is between $7,000 and $10,000 a year, depending on what city you live in. Now, these poor people here, obviously, they have to have 5 cars in the family because they live in an unwalkable place. And so to be economically viable, meaning can you get to work, then everyone has to drive. Now, if you take the low end of the spectrum, then 5 times 7,000 is $35,000 a year to own and operate those cars. Now, I don't know about here, but in most places, an additional $35,000 a year in house payments would actually get them into a really nice house instead if they lived in a place that didn't have to drive. And so it makes a huge difference in in just the economic vitality of the people. These are at the same scale. This is all of Renaissance Florence. Okay, this is Spaghetti Junction in Atlanta. Okay, now I started at the point where the off-ramps start, and so as you can see, Spaghetti Junction is actually bigger than a city that literally changed the world. Okay, and there's not a whole lot of world changing that's going to be going on there, as you can tell. Let's take a closer look. I'm going to zoom in just a bit. This is I-95 in Miami on the north side of town. And what I've done is I've mapped out all of the land that could have some real estate value in green, and then that which cannot possibly have any real estate value in red. And so because of the need for speed, you see, the thing about this diagram, let's go back a notch, it's not like somebody was really nefarious or mean or whatever. You really do need this size of curves if the cars aren't going to run off the road. That is a necessary price of speed, okay? It's not like we have stupid engineers. They know what they're doing. It's just that's what you need if you want to go fast. Matter of fact, you have to have the big medians and shoulders and stuff, so if somebody runs off here, they're not going to immediately crash into a house. I mean, that's just part of the necessity. This is Seaside, Florida, just down the coast a little bit. And it is more typical of a traditional neighborhood in terms of its percentage of land with no real estate value, meaning out in the middle of the streets. And basically, as you can see here, if we go back, there's about twice as much land here because you need to travel fast here that has no value as there is here. So it really is a huge burden. The need for speed is a huge burden in the city. Here's another way of valuing real estate, and that is by the front foot. A lot of places, that's actually what's used more than just per acre. And so here what we've got, the green is the frontages that have full value, whatever the value is there. And the brown, these are the side streets, so there's no addresses on the side streets, okay? So that has only partial value, you might say. And then the red has no value at all. Incidentally, because you can't possibly set up shop on the edge of the interstate. They won't let you. It's against the law. And so incidentally, the most expensive roads are the ones likely to have no value at all on the frontages. Seaside, of course, has value on every frontage in town. There's no frontage in town that doesn't have some addresses, and so it's just a world of difference. We've called these things freeways for a long time, but when a freeway goes into town, it should really be known as a cheap way because of how much it cheapens the property value. Now, what I did is I took one section in Indianapolis, because I think Indianapolis probably would be considered to be kind of a typical American city, or as typical as any, that is. And I was able to get some actual tax roll values off of some of these properties as you come down and then across. And basically, this is the interstate coming through town. This is downtown, and here's as you move out. Now, in the city, the base value seems to be about $3 million per acre. And then out here, it gets real steady to about $80,000 an acre. And what I've done is I've looked at, this is the actual value, going to zero when you get to the interstate corridor. And if you would have started at that 80,000 and go up at just a reasonable curve like that, then the difference, the green, is actually how much money is being lost. And so if you take that value per mile and multiply it out by all the miles of urban interstates in the U.S., then we've lost somewhere upwards of $1 trillion in real estate value by letting the interstates come into the city. And then if you look at the losses in state property tax, now the only numbers I could get was state property tax, but then there's city and county, and there's also sales tax values that are lost by businesses that can't be here, that would otherwise be there. Then you're looking at dozens of billions of dollars of lost revenue per year for cities all over the country. Now, when the interstates brought massive amounts of workers into the city to work, that was one thing. Now what's happening, of course, is a lot of the industry actually, or the businesses are actually moving out to the suburbs where the people are. And so now this great cost doesn't really have the same payback that it did at one point in time. We really ruined our cities in the vicinity of the interstates with not the benefit that we once had. I kind of paraphrased John Norquist. I understand he's been here. Something he said at a conference I was speaking at him with one time, we were both speaking at. But the public infrastructure expenditure per square foot of developed space is inversely proportional to your ability to walk to lunch. In other words, these people here have no possible way of walking to lunch over there because they've spent too much on the freeways. There's no way to get across it. I was speaking about a year ago out in Santa Fe, and I picked the closest subdivision to the point I was speaking at. And I got a Google Earth image of it and plotted in red where all the houses are. Now this is a T&D that takes up the exact same space. It's 90 acres in both diagrams. Now, this is not an actual neighborhood plan. It's too rigid for that. You see, it's kind of mechanical looking, but what I'm trying to do is get some of the same metrics that you would get. In other words, we have some Main Street shops and some Muse units and some cottages and townhouses and so forth, all the way out to some big mansions at this edge. And so that gets you kind of a typical metric for a T&D. Now, in both cases, it's 90 acres. Over here, it's 114 units. Here's 814 units. Okay, it's 700 more units. Over here, there's no shops or offices. Here, it's almost 100 square feet of shops and offices per unit. If you look at the civic space, this has none. There's no civic space at all here. There's one square here. There's 4 pocket parks here in playgrounds. And so that's a total of about 140 square feet per unit of civic space that is walkable to them. If you look at your major thoroughfares, they've got the arterial here, about 13 feet of arterial per unit, but that creates no real estate value, okay? Because you can't, there's no businesses on it or other addresses, but they have no main street. Over here, they have no arterial, but they have a main street, which creates great real estate value. I mean, that's the highest value in town, very often is on the main street. If you look at the minor thoroughfares, they've got locals over here. It's about 3,600 square feet of paving per unit just in the locals. Over here, you have streets, so it's about a little less than 1,000 square feet of paving per unit there. So a huge difference in the infrastructure burden. Now, a lot of people say, well, I don't want to have alleys. Because that means that it's going to cost me more money. I'll have paving that I wouldn't otherwise have. Well, I hate to break it to you, but there's also, you got to look at the driveways. So here, if you add up all of the driveways, then what you find is that it's 1,296 feet of paving per unit versus over here, the total paving area is about a third of that. Okay, because the driveways are so much shorter because you're coming in right off the alley. On public safety, you're protecting 46 units per mile traveled by police or fire over here, and 175 over here, so almost 4 times as much protection. Or another way of looking at that, that's almost 1/4 as many police cars and fire trucks that you'll need to protect the same number of citizens, I should say. And then on the infrastructure, it's a similar thing. Almost 115 feet of utilities per unit versus 30 over here. So everywhere it's a great burden of building that way. Here you get the full load miles. Almost 90% of the trips have to be done with the car. Now, even using a conservative estimate of the difference, then that's still saving at least 1.5 trips a day, and that's today with gas prices as they are. If they go up, you'd be saving even more. Also, and this is a huge one, as long as this place remains occupied, in other words, unless it becomes a ghost town and everybody moves out, then you're having this much space that you don't need to build. It's preserving that much land in perpetuity, okay, around your city, because these people are here. They don't need to be in all that much space there. This is a very important self-diagnosis that everyone in the room needs to do. This is mine that I'm going to illustrate for you. It's what I call the web of daily life, okay? Here's my home, here's my office. This one is, there's a park a couple of blocks from each. There's a post office right across the street from my office. There's the doctor's office. Incidentally, I don't have to go there nearly as much. When I moved down there, I was kind of a tired old man at 43 years old. I was a really big guy, and I moved down and started walking all the time, and I lost 60 pounds, so stay healthy. I might not even been alive now had I maintained that trajectory. So there's the doctor. Here's the accountant. Here's the bank. Here's my vitamin store. Here's the grocery store that's closest to home. Here's one of 3 grocery stores that are within 2 blocks of the office. So we buy by the meal. We don't need a big SUV to stock up for a month's provisions. We just carry it in one bag, and that's it. It's like, what do you want for dinner? I'll walk down and buy it. Then this is the hardware store. Now that's far enough that we normally ride the bike to go there, but we have a bike with baskets on it, and so you can get what you need in the baskets. We do have a car. We only crank it about twice a week, though. And here's the bookstore. Here's the Apple store. Then here's a number of my favorite restaurants, but there's really about 200 restaurants within this picture. I like to run. There's one 3-mile run. Here's another, and here's another. When you put all of that together, you get what I call the web of daily life. Now, what you should ask yourself, sometime map this out yourself before the weekend, and then ask yourself, at $10 a gallon for gasoline, how many pieces of my daily life are going to be, web of daily life will be clipped because I can't afford them anymore. And then ask at $20 a gallon. Okay, now you say those are ridiculous numbers. Well, let me tell you something. I'm not really old, 52, but I can remember when I was 10 years old, that a little over 40 years ago, that gas was regularly as low as $29.9, and occasionally during something that we called gas wars back then, where the gas stations were competing. That term has a different meaning now. But during a gas war, it'd get down as low as $19.9. And so basically 20 cents a gallon. Recently, I paid $5 a gallon back in, what was it, 08, when it first got to that level. It looks like it's headed back. And so that's 25 times as high as it was 40 years ago. Okay? Now, between $5 a gallon and $20 a gallon, that's only 4 times as high. That's roughly 1/6 as much. There's no shadow of a doubt it's going to get there. Okay? So you really need to do this self-diagnosis yourself just to see where you are. So at this point, we have 4 major things happening in the world around us that any one of these would change our world as we know it. But the 4 of them together are going to produce a change that is going to be unlike any that we've seen in our lifetimes. And matter of fact, that it really goes. It's about as big of a change as at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. I mean, it really is a big deal. We know about the meltdown. And what that's going to do in terms of changing how we inhabit places. If you live here, of course, the construction on the subdivision got stopped, and that's kind of a lonely place. Do you really want to be there anymore? And so values are hardest hit in the most far-flung parts of the city. There are 2.5 billion people just in China and in India that are in the process of moving from a low-impact agrarian lifestyle into the city. They've started doing it a few years ago. They'll be doing it for a few more years. Now, if those 2 countries do 2.5 times as well as we have in the U.S. with the need for cars in the city, okay, then that means that there will, in a few more years, there will be 1 billion cars on the road that didn't exist just a few years ago, okay? Now, I don't care what you think about peak oil. This is just supply and demand 101. If you have that many more people that are competing for gasoline, there's no shadow of a doubt where the price is going. Matter of fact, this change is far bigger than some of the ones that have happened in the past. We have, obviously, there's the whole specter of climate change, and I don't really care. It doesn't matter to me who caused it, whether nature caused it or people caused it. That's not the real issue. The real issue is we know it's happening. I mean, if you look at the if you look at the satellite maps of the Arctic, for example, this will be the first time in forever that you've been able to. This summer, you're going to be able to sail around the northern end of Canada without an icebreaker. Okay, I mean, it's going to be clear ice, so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to say, you know, what can we do to mitigate mitigate circumstances where we can continue to live. Otherwise, we're going to, if we do nothing, then we can have a completely unthinkable situation. The fourth one is what I call the demographic bomb. Now, this is really scary. I didn't even know anything about this until last year. Basically, the demographers are now saying that in the U.S., we've had, from the end of World War II until now, we've had net purchasers in the U.S. home market. You know, more people wanting to buy than wanting to sell. Okay, as of right about now, that's tipping. And for the next 40 to 50 years, they project, we're going to have more sellers than buyers. The reason is the aging population, because obviously if you're 20, you're almost always buying a house. If you're in the market, you're a purchaser. Okay, if you're 80, you know, very few people buy a house at 80. You're normally a seller at that point. And so what's going to happen is what has driven, you know, after we offshored most industry, then really the biggest industry in the U.S. Has actually been the housing industry. But if you have downward pressure on prices for the next several decades, that is a really, really, really scary thing, because that's most of us, that's our big investment in life, is our house. And so what I'm predicting is going to happen is that, you know, if you were just in a regular subdivision where everything is kind of the same, you know, the sweet spot house that the builders talked about, you know, the 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths or whatever, that, you know, for the kind of the Ozzie and Harriet family, if you will, then and you're in an undifferentiated subdivision of that, then you really are going to have some tough choices. Do you want to continue to lose value for probably close to the rest of your life, or do you want to do something that radically increases the cool factor of your subdivision to turn it into a real neighborhood? Okay, and so there's some places that will do that because they say we don't want to be on this long slide with everybody else. You know, so we want to actually make our place a whole lot more attractive to people, so the values there will begin to rise again. And so this is that in my mind is the biggest challenge we're going to have in placemaking for really most of the rest of our lives. And so I call it the 12-step program for sprawl recovery, because really sprawl has been an addiction to us since the end of World War II. And so this is how this 12 steps works. Before we get into that, however, there's 3 game changers that I want to talk about. It's the transect and pedestrian propulsion, or actually I've now changed that term just very recently to walk appeal, and then the sky method. The transect was invented originally as a system of managing the natural environment. We've realized in more recent times that it can be used for the human environment as well, all the way from T1, which is what it was invented for, down to T6, which is the urban core. And then you have in between the rural or the farmland, the suburban, the general urban, and then the urban center. Then the second idea is walk appeal, and there's several things that we now know and we can actually give you metrics for most of these of what's the most effective number to, you know, if you pull something closer to the sidewalk, it's more interesting because you can not only see into the shop window or whatever it is, but your view changes more frequently. Like if you can change someone's view in about 6 seconds, for example, then if you can change it that frequently versus 20 or 30 seconds, it's a more interesting walk. You know, it's about entertaining the pedestrians, so they'll walk there. You know, we've used this metric of the quarter-mile radius for years because somebody did a study years ago that said the average American, if it's less than a quarter of a mile, they'll actually walk. If it's more than a quarter of a mile, they'll drive. But that's really a very, very blunt instrument. Here's how it really works. This is the quarter-mile radius, as is that. This is a power center, and as we all know, if you're parked in front of Best Buy and you come out and you want to go to Old Navy, There's no way that you're going to walk across the parking lot. You get in your car and you drive to as close as you can possibly get to the Old Navy front door, and you might even wait 2-3 minutes for somebody to pull out of a space before you go 3 spaces further. That's not because you're stupid or lazy. It's because it's such a dreadful pedestrian experience. I do that too, you know, and that's just natural. That's a natural state of affairs. So the walking radius here is much less than 1/4 mile in this setting. This is Rome. This is the Piazza del Popolo. And this is the Vittorio Emanuele. And people regularly walk that distance and keep on walking in Rome because it's such a great walking environment. So here, as you can see, it's a whole lot further than 1/4 mile radius. As a matter of fact, I have a number of different settings here. The green standard is what I call the London standard, and the point is there, in great cities like that, you probably walk somewhere closer to 2 miles before you'll drive. And the T5 standard, which is a good main street, you'll walk about 3/4 mile. The T4 standard is where the 1/4 mile radius actually works. On streets like this, people will walk about 1/4 mile before they drive. If you get out into T3, it goes down to 1/10 mile, where, you know, the houses are further apart. There's nothing wrong with this street. It's just not as entertaining because the houses are further apart and further back from the street. And then the subdivision standard, they'll only walk about 250 feet. If you have 50-foot lots, you know, you might walk about 5 houses down, but that's about as far as you're going, you know. And then the power center standard, you'll only walk about 100 feet. Okay, you see this is getting redder and redder down here. And the total red is the parking backed standard, where you might walk 25 feet. In reality, you'll only walk there if your car breaks down, okay? I developed, the third game changer is what I call the sky method. I developed the sky method several years ago back in 2008, for a place in Florida, a new town called Sky that's near Tallahassee. It hasn't been built yet. It was one of many developments that was caught up in the whole meltdown, and so therefore it's not under construction yet. But the idea here is that what I did is I said, okay, on these blocks, I'm going to code the frontages according to the various transect zones. So this is T5, this is T4, and then that's T3, and that's T2. Now, what happens is if the idea is to be able to develop over time in ways that you don't have to see the end from the beginning. Because if you have to see the end from the beginning, know where every lot line will someday be, then that really is a difficulty that actually the best old towns didn't do. But it also is now I developed it as an idea for development of raw land, okay? But it also works as a sprawl repair tool as well. So if you take the point at which this might be sort of like a regular subdivision might be. Now, some of these are bigger lots, you know, but somebody might actually be holding on to several lots, and so that's not really atypical. And what you do is you go into the city or the town founder, depending on if it's a development or a municipality, and you say, I want to upgrade from T3 to T4, for example. And then when you upgrade, you have to pay a price for the upgrade, and then at that point in time, then you're able to build more houses and subdivide your land, sell these off. Now, when you do the upgrade, then the city's going to come in and upgrade the road, because like in that county, a T3 or even a T2 road in particular would be just a sand road. And so, of course, they come in and they pave the road and do other improvements, and then the process continues. You keep on moving along with these upgrades over time, and then you get, and then also you can, it's coded by the frontage. So that means that whoever owned that piece of land, they say, well, I want to upgrade it to this standard, and so now they're able to get some rear lane cottages there, and the process continues. Now we start to get into the T5, and at the first, these are just simply very little shops or offices that are built out right to the frontage, like you see in a lot of old towns, and the process continues. Now, you'll notice here in a minute that this guy is still saying, well, I want to hold on to my land. I kind of like having all this land, and I don't want to sell off. But, you know, what will eventually happen is that, you know, time takes its toll, and he dies, and his kids say, well, you know, we got a lot of value here. Why don't we vacate this so that we can put a real main street in there and actually do a full-blown town center. And so town center building, I should say, as opposed to some of these smaller shops that you would have over here. Now, let me say one thing also, and that is that I'm nowhere near good enough to do that organic of a plan had I tried to foresee the end from the beginning. Okay, but because I looked at each of these as its own separate little design challenge and did them just one project at a time, not trying to foresee, then you actually got something that was a whole lot better. This is how regular townspeople with no planning experience built wonderful organic towns all through history. You know, it's just because it's a sequence of a lot of little really building projects that each one kind of heals the mistakes of the previous one, I guess you'd say. And so it's something to think about. So what are the steps? Well, the first step is to create the civic space. Now, if you're in a subdivision that is undifferentiated, then you say, well, where's that going to be? Well, what you do, I think the best way is to find the bank that has the biggest number of foreclosures in the subdivision and say, look, we're going to raise the values here, so you need to take one of those foreclosed houses and give it up and let us take it down, and that will become the main civic space for the neighborhood. Now, civic space doesn't have to be as big as your square here. You know, that was here in town. It can actually be quite small. This plaza here is only 70 feet wide. I stepped it off. You know, so that's like a single lot, whereas your square here is actually an entire block. So it can be a lot smaller than a block. The number two thing is the thoroughfare recovery. Now, we know how to do a lot of things to actually make the streets better. And so you'll have, the streets are as friendly for the people as they are for the cars, you know, because the cars are behaving better there. We know how to do that, but how do you insert alleys and rear lanes where there aren't some already? Well, I think you need to do that on a block-by-block basis, and you need to go to the residents of just that one block and say, look, if you will give up the last 15 feet, or even you can do it with 10 feet of your lot, because the right-of-way needs to be between 20 and 30 feet wide, depending on how you code some other things. If you'll give that up, then you get by right the ability to build and sell an accessory unit on your lot, and so you can make money, okay? And that's also kind of the gateway drug, since we're talking about addictions, for the cities to start to allow accessory units as well, because we're going to talk more about those in just a moment. When you do that, then all the messy stuff that you see here, like on garbage day and all that, you know, rear lanes and alleys are meant to be sort of messy, so you can have a really nice frontage like that, which will entice people to get out and walk more. By the way, everything I'm talking about here all works on enticement. It's about trying to say, you know, this is in your best interest. You know, let us do something that will be good for you. Okay? No, there should be nothing that has to do with scolding. It should all be enticement. The next thing is to think about is the on-street parking. As a matter of fact, they tell us now that every single space you can put on the street in a thriving retail district will make $250,000 in sales for the merchants of that street. So it becomes a highly valuable thing. The other thing is that's what makes sidewalk cafes even possible. You know, if these cars are traveling at high speed, you'd be insane to want to sit out there. You know, one of them jumps the curb and you're toast, you know. And so it's a really good thing on several counts. What you don't want to do, though, is to ever have this condition, which you do. You have some here, every city does, because people never walk on sidewalks that are between a parking lot and the street. They just don't. And so everywhere you have these, you really need to consider a liner building. A liner building is just a narrow building, can be 18 feet wide or less. That would be like an apartment upstairs maybe, and then shops on the first level or whatever. But you don't have to give up much space to actually create those, and then that creates a much more walkable downtown. Walkability is really fragile. The only reason this guy is getting out on the street, you can see that he's just cooking. You know, I mean, this is Dallas in July, and as hot as anything. Now, there are street trees here, but there's not all the way down there. And so you can't have just a few street trees. You really need to have them along every street that you expect people to walk on. You know, if you don't have them in this climate, you know, in the summertime, you can forget it. They're not going to do it. Then the next step number 3 is accessory units. Now, this is a classic. This is the carriage house. This is what I call a rear of lot cottage. This is one right here in town. And then this is another type, the upstairs apartment, you know, where somebody actually lives up there. And then this is, like in Key West, this is a rear lane alley. In London, they do something like a rear lane alley where you actually have an address inside the block, except these are called Muse, these are attached. And these are a number of different types, because what you need to do, if you're out in sprawl and you want to eventually have a mix of uses, you need more customers. Okay, because you don't have enough customers there for any mix of use to survive. You know, something other than a house, the business won't make it. Okay, so what we're trying to do is we're saying, how can we make that more like this? You know, what you have here downtown. The next thing is that every building ought to give a gift to the street. And if every building did give some kind of a gift to the street, it makes that street a much more enticing place to walk. You know, a gift to the street can do something like it can shelter people, like an awning. It can refresh them, like this is the best example, which is a sidewalk cafe. It could be something as small of a refreshment as just a street fountain. It can delight them like this beautiful frontage garden. It can direct them like the tower in the distance that kind of gives you a goal to walk to. It can entertain them like a great storefront. It can inform them like a clock or sundial. It can help them remember like this memorial, or it can simply give them a place to rest. So if every building does that, then that would be a much better place to walk. Number 5 is to reinstitute the idea of edible gardens being a good thing. But what we also need to do is relearn how to do an edible garden in a lovable way. You know, a lot of people spend about as much time with their vegetable garden and how it looks as they would in their laundry room. You know, and so it seems like more of a utility to them as opposed to something that could be beautiful. But why can't it be beautiful? I mean, it's just a different palette of materials. It's still plant material. And then not everybody is going to want to raise their own food. And so every neighborhood needs a farmer's market. Number 6, this is where we get into the first of the businesses coming in. By this time, you have enough customers there, or potential customers there, that the first places to eat can come in. And places to eat are kind of, a lot of them are kind of oblivious to the local surroundings, because they can bring people in to all sorts of places that might have been sketchy or whatever to begin with. And so that'll be the first thing that will come in. And in particular, the third place. You know, the third place is kind of, it's sort of like the old, does anybody remember Cheers, the show? You know, and their tagline was where everybody knows your name. You know, and it's not some place you just go occasionally, but you know, your first place is home, your second place is work, and then the third place is an eatery or a coffee shop or something like that. And then the next step, number 7, is the bed and breakfast. Because as we're trying to get more homes into a neighborhood, one of the biggest burdens that we have on square footage in homes is the necessity of everybody having a guest suite. You know, right before the meltdown, a typical guest suite of a bedroom and a bathroom and a closet was around 250 square feet. Now, I don't know what your construction costs are here, but in parts of the country, you know, a lot of parts of the country, you know, you spend $200 a foot on a nice home, and at $200 a foot, that's 50 grand. Okay, just to have a guest come occasionally. If you take that 50 grand, you know, whatever your mortgage payments would be on that, you could easily put your guest up in a bed and breakfast right down the street, and your guests would probably appreciate that of you, and you probably appreciate it as well, because they're not stumbling all over you as well. You meet them when you want to. They're not underfoot all the time. And so every neighborhood ought to have a bed and breakfast. For example, I just walked from the bed and breakfast like 3.5 blocks down or whatever, where I'm staying tonight. And then the number 8 is a number of different unit types and sizes, especially the small cottages. This is one right here in town. People think of a small cottage and they get all sorts of scary ideas in their mind for some reason, but they can be really charming things. In matter of fact, in places that have finally built some of these, you know, every place I work, I tell people to say, you need to have some one-bedroom cottages. They say, it's impossible, I can't sell them. Well, every place that's finally built them, the one-bedrooms, because that market has been so hideously underserved for so many years, they sell out almost instantaneously. There's a place near Montgomery, Alabama, where I served for a number of years as town planner and town architect. And I finally got them to build some one-bedroom cottages. I was trying to buy one as an investment. Well, even though I was town planner and town architect, I could never get my offer in quick enough. They always sold before I could get my offer in. So it really is the opposite of what people think. We also need broader housing types. This is the idea house, the coastal living idea house we did last year in Norfolk. It actually, because of some design features it has, it can stay in the same family for centuries, because you actually have, it will house 3 generations of a family rather than 2. And so you move to different master bedrooms depending on what point in life you are and your parents or your children. And so it's something that can stay in the family for a very long time. By this time, we're getting to the point that we can support some live-work units. You know, this is a classic American Main Street idea of if you live above the shop. Matter of fact, America was built with places like this all over. It's just we've forgotten how to do them recently, but we really need to learn how to do it again, because that's been so hideously underserved for so many years. You know, when it was illegal to live where you work, then as a result of that, the live-work should be the hottest unit type for the next several decades in the U.S. because we have so few of them other than right downtown. But it doesn't have to be the live above the shop. You can have the work in the apartment frontage or in the row house frontage or in the detached house frontage, or you can even have the work behind. This is a little workshop that's behind the house. Now, I don't know if the person that lives here actually works here, but they could. And so if that's the case, then that's the work nearby. And we need to think about how to do this stuff incrementally. This is a house in the Bahamas. It started out with just that one, the house here, but then over time they added the little office here and the little shop there. And that's what the Sky method was illustrating in some of its T5. Now at this point, you've gotten far enough along that you actually should be able to have the neighborhood market, because one of the real tests of a sustainable place is, can you walk to the grocery? You know, and so at this point you ought to have enough customers in that neighborhood that it could support a market. And then number 11 is a dedicated office and retail where you don't actually have to live above. You know, if you live above, I mean, you got to have a mortgage payment anyway. And so having that shop below, that's kind of a bonus that you get to work there. But this is where you want to come in and set up shop here and actually live somewhere else. So here, I mean, if you don't make the payments, then you're out on the street, and so that's a little bit of a different, psychologically it's different than the live work. It's a harder thing to do. You begin with the incubators. This is a Robert Orr's office. Some of you might know him. He has he's designed a lot of stuff in Seaside, but up in New Haven. Now, business has dropped off for him as well as other architects, and so his office, the front part, he's rented out to a yoga studio, as you can see, and then the back part is an incubator where you can come in and buy an hour of office time or a day or a week or however much you want to buy from him and operate very, very small like that. The next step up, once you graduate from the incubator, is to the tiny shops. You know, you need some of these in town. As a matter of fact, these are the ones that are and this is, I'm going to warn you, I'm about to drop the C-bomb, okay? You know, in polite company, you normally worry about the F-bomb, but what I'm talking about is a word that every other American has no problem with. But architects, we have a terrible problem with it, and the word is charming, okay? I mean, if anybody else says charming, you know exactly what they mean, and that's fine. If an architect says it, then it probably means that it's an insult, you know? But you know, normally the little tiny shops, you know, 12 feet wide or less, are some of the most charming shops in town. Even, I mean, this is just built of like concrete block and, well, this is, or whatever that is there, and then brick, and nothing fancy about that. It's just so small that it is charming. Another thing we need to think about is reinstituting the idea of the single crew workplace. You know, forever, businesses have said, we're growing bigger to serve you better, right? You know, how many times have you heard that? And the idea is, the larger you get, the more efficient you are. That's actually not the case. The real standard of efficiency is the single crew workplace. For example, in a restaurant, it's one cook and one waiter, okay? This is Mike and this is Patty with Mike and Patty's in Boston. And they have a wonderful little restaurant that's less than 300 square feet. You can only sit about 15 or 20 people in there, but it works very efficiently. They get written up all over, you know, it's a great place to eat and all this. And like if you have a B&B, for example, the single crew is one housekeeping person. Now that one housekeeping person can do about 8 rooms a day. So if you have An 8-room B&B, that's very efficient. It's as efficient on housekeeping as a 40-room hotel. Okay? Now, but if you have a 12-room B&B, then you have to have 2 people, not 1, and so that becomes an inefficient thing. So what we really ought to be thinking about is what is a single crew for each business type. When we do that, you can build a whole lot smaller stuff than what we ever imagined today, because that's the real standard of efficiency. And then there's also, at the beginning of that, then you have the home conversions, like this one here in town, you know, because there's all kinds of doctors' offices, lawyers' offices, architects' offices, and all this that are very well suited for what was once a house. And so that can happen as well. And finally, the last step is the idea of having the civic buildings. And so it could be a church or a meeting hall or whatever. And that normally comes towards the end of the process. You probably won't be building any of these at an early stage, although you might. But at the very least, it would be you know, at the tail end of the process, at the most extreme. And so those are the 12 steps. And what it does, you notice I've used a lot of photos from here in town. Okay, my point of doing that, and that was only in 15 minutes of shooting. We had meetings here this afternoon. I got out and I photographed for 15 minutes. And my point of this is that you guys have the material. You got the patterns. Okay. You know, you got the good stuff here. You simply, the best thing that we need, you know, so often it's so easy to look past what you've seen every day for the last 20, 30, 40 years or whatever, and not really notice it. But you got the tools. You just need to implement those tools. You first of all need to strengthen what you have here. You know, with things like those parking lots, you know, where you can have the liner buildings instead. But then what you also need to do is to say, hey, if I live out in a subdivision somewhere out in Sprawl, not right downtown, you know, it's actually possible to transform the place you live into something with a cool factor like this, and even better. And I got to say this too. Y'all are here every day. I haven't been here in a number of years. I forget the exact year, but it's been probably a decade or so ago, something like that. In the transformation of here in town from a decade ago until now, it is really quite striking. I really want to applaud you on that. But you need to keep that process up, but then realize that all of the suburban places around can be that good as well. So thank you very much. One other thing I want to mention here real quickly before we take Q&A, and that is that originalgreen.org is where I blog a lot. It's got a lot of resources and stuff on there. So if you want to write that down and visit that sometime, please feel free. It's some. If you like what I just said, you'll like that as well. So, yeah.
First off, thank you for coming to Pensacola. I really appreciate your talk. I read recently from Wendell Berry wrote an essay about the world turning on affection. And, you know, he was a disciple of Wallace Stegner who said, when you know where you are, you know who you are. And I thought, and his talk about affection was all about how when you love a place, you're organic about what you grow in that place. How if you're a farmer, you work with the environment that you're in. With your work in Katrina Cottages and other work, can you talk a little bit about how the atmosphere of a place, the culture, its history, it's kind of like emotional landscape, how that interacts with placemaking?
Oh, I'd be delighted. As a matter of fact, one thing that I didn't talk about at all tonight, but thank you for bringing it up, is when people talk about green buildings, the first requirement for a truly sustainable building is that it be lovable. Because if it can't be loved, it won't last. We'll find a reason to tear it down. You know, and then how can we ever consider anything sustainable if we keep throwing stuff away? Okay, because I would plead for the common sense, plain spoken definition of that term. You know, according to who you talk to today, that word can mean almost anything, and of course, something that means anything really means nothing. But I would suggest that word should mean, if you just break it down, sustainable, able to sustain. I would say that should mean, can you keep it going in a healthy way long into an uncertain future? Because if you can't do that, then it's simply not sustainable, no matter how many green points you got or accolades or whatever. But the first step is that it be lovable. And then once it's lovable, it needs to be durable enough to carry that lovability long into an uncertain future, and then flexible enough to be used for many things. Because if a building lasts for 1,000 years, now that's unthinkable today with as cheap as we build. But for most of human history, we built stuff for the ages. And if a building lasts for 1,000 years, it'll be used for something other than its program purpose for probably 90 to 95% of its lifetime. Meaning that the program is the most overrated thing in architecture. Even if you're building a house today, if it lasts that long, it'll be used for other things other than houses for most of the time. And then if it is lovable, durable, and flexible, then it needs to be frugal, with the resources. But a lot of people focus on one tiny part of frugality that I call gizmo green. Now, gizmo green is the proposition that with better equipment and better materials, we can achieve sustainability. Well, that's a part of it, but it's only actually a very small part. Unfortunately, if you look at the national media, all of the discussion on green building is all about gizmo green. So the whole lovability issue, they're missing entirely. And I'm working on a set of ideas about lovability of place as well, because it isn't just buildings. Like that was actually what you were pointing out at the beginning was lovability of place. And there's ways several ways that places can, larger than a building can be very lovable or not. And I got to say that what we built since the advent of sprawl, at the end of World War II, is some of the most unlovable places in human history. We literally have never done so badly as we've done since the end of World War II. But we can turn it around. We can't afford to throw this all away. And even if you thought you would, if you live downtown and you say, well, all that sprawl, we don't need it anymore, try telling that to people that live there. They'll bring out the shotgun, And, but so we have to heal it. And we don't have a choice. And so that's why I think that the recovery of sprawl to vibrant places is literally our generation's biggest challenge. So,
we have time for one more question.
Thank you again for an excellent lecture. My question deals with, do you think there's any place in the United States that can have strict zoning that will force people to live tightly and efficiently like you've described, zoning and regulation?
Zoning and regulation it only gets up to a standard of competence. It can't take you to greatness. Okay, if you want to build a great place, it takes more than zoning. Zoning just prevents you from having an explosives factory next door or something like that. It can do that. It very effectively does that. And so we need zoning, but what we really need is things that will entice people into wanting to live. Because you can't force people. We're Americans. It's not like if you live in the Soviet Union, they could force you to. They'd say one town here, you guys got to pick up and move over there. Okay, we don't do that. It doesn't work with us. And so it all has to be about enticement. In other words, how could you make a place so vibrant and so good that people want to live there? Now, so that really is that takes us beyond zoning. So so like I say, zoning only gets part of the way. And someone had a question back. Who was it? I saw a hand a minute ago.
Mine isn't so much a question. Get the mic. Is more of a confirmation. I recently just moved back from Atlanta in the suburbs purposely, and you had a picture next to Hub Stacy's, and I moved my office into Hub Stacy's.
Oh, wow.
But part of the purpose of doing that is I have an IT company, and they have good pipes here.
Sure.
So I can confirm my neighborhood in Atlanta, I couldn't walk anywhere. And
right.
Tonight, my office is next to Hub Stacy's. I walked to Fish House. I walked to the game. I walked to this event. And this is phenomenal. I wouldn't trade it for anything. So kudos for your talk tonight.